So here's a video showing the flow patterns at Pope. We started up at the north part. You can see here the main 3 points of water flow. We'll go back and investigate a little more. Got 2 standing pools, which kind of implies a little bit of ground leveling there by the bush, but not so much of cross-channel flow. So as I looked at it, I couldn't really see anything of notable erosion or flow rate. So I don't think the water was actually coming across from the bush right to left at this point of the trail. Translation, no big issues. But here you can begin to see still flow from the trailing edge of the storm going along the right edge of the path and then crossing over, and so there may be actual flow that occurs there that we need to look at. I'll continue down the path. We're just trying to walk it from start to finish. You can see that not all the water actually leaves the trail as it crosses over, so one thing we could look at is trying to lower the edges to get the water to have a way out, or drainage could also do it, like drain piping would also do the same thing. As we continue down the path, what we're looking at is the main crossover points still, and at this point I noticed that there's a lot of water actually coming from the wall itself based on grass being bent down. So I start to go over and look at it more. You'll see that there's water flow still happening at the wall base, whereas it wasn't so much even on the trail. So that's implying that this is actually one of the main drainage flows for the area. We have outflows. Actually, I'm pointing one out. Actually, outflow points where you can see the current coming from the wall out into the edge of the wall. So that also tells you that there's a lot of water actually inside of the wall that's moving along it until it hits a damming or an upslope, and then it comes out. Here's another outflow point right by the first tree, which makes sense because that's where we noticed on the trail where we had crossover from the grass across the trail and down. That was the first crossover point, if you recall. So I'm continuing back up the trail trying to find these outflow points, kind of bypassing my original plan of going end to end and start to finish with the flow. But I'm just trying to pinpoint where are the outflow points, because that kind of implies where the natural upslopes are as the wall runs down from north to south, and from there we could kind of understand where we would need to have like natural ditching low points to cross over with piping, or larger ditching areas to catch that amount of water. And here I'm looking across the wall because I'm realizing a lot of the water is actually coming not from this side of the wall where I am, but actually on the other side where the field is. It's actually sloping into the wall, and so the drainage from the field is coming to the wall and then runs along the wall or inside of the wall and then pops over when it hits a low point. So you can see here I'm pointing to the low grass areas by the tree and talking about how there's an upslope by the tree that would turn the water at that point out of the wall and across the trail right there. So I keep going here, and sadly this is right by the first trailhead, so a lot of the water that was running in the actual wall would come out and hit the trail, whereas if it had been like 22 feet earlier, you're not going to change the slope of the hill itself, but if the trailhead had been 20 feet earlier, 20 feet later, that water might have actually found a way off the trail prior to the trailhead turning and allowing it to run with the slope. Now here's interesting, between the 2 spurs it's actually kind of dry. If you notice, looking at the trail, the wall base itself implies that a lot of the water is not turning out here, it's flowing along the wall. But look at this. This is the weird thing. First time I noticed it. Weird slurry slash fusion, fancy word, but there's some type of high water volume, water pressure coming from here. I'm actually feeling into the hole, trying to sense what kind it is, and it was actually very much like a milkshake mixture, almost to palm depth if you stick your hand in, so you're maybe 2 to 3 inches deep of just water and dirt floating. And it was at these slurry points, the little slurry pools were all over the place along the wall. So it kind of told me that there was water pushing up out from these points or something, because when we went and looked at it later after storms, that those points had kind of firmed up a little bit, became very loosely packed dirt or mud. So I keep going, looking at it, and so now I'm going to continue down and actually look at the normal flow pattern down the trail. You can see here that the southernmost spur is actually kind of a neutral flow for it. It kind of goes right down the middle and then cuts across. Might want to slope that into the midpoint if we do drainage in the mid, to then can do a controlled crossover with a piping there at the intersection of the Y. But you can kind of see here the damage right after a heavy downpour. And the rain here that night was probably I got here right at the tail end. It was still sprinkling, but it had probably been a 30-minute heavy downpour right before this. But I think also there were heavy rains that night. I don't know total inches of rain that happened, but it was a pretty good rain. You might see this type of rain 2 to 3 times a year. We had a similar event at Pope that did even worse erosion than this. Probably the worst rain we'd seen in 8 years, that tore up almost all the trail bed. So they just repaired it, and then this happened again same summer. So now I'm going back up. I'm kind of trying to see on the grass if there's bent grass areas where I can kind of get a sense of if there's water flow across the grass. I don't really see anything except for the crossover points that we talked about earlier. Here's I'm looking now at the top part for it. Now I'm looking over here to see if it crosses over anywhere in here. Really not seeing anything. So at this, now I'm like wanting to investigate, and so here I'm also again checking to see if the water's ever crossing in large volume over that barrier on the right edge that we're walking along now, and you really don't see it. So that tells me a lot of the water is just running with the trail and not jumping that edge. So we could look at that potentially if the drainage ditching doesn't work. So now I've jumped up to the top of the trailhead. Here we're way past the top of the bush where we started before, because I want to see the water flow on this other side. And of course, we are seeing a lot of notable water flow. It's kind of moving, but it's interesting that the drainage is actually 2 to 3 feet from the wall on the other side. It's kind of a natural ditching happening. So the water, while coming from the left where we were, might cross over it. You can see it there. See the water on the right. It's actually kind of staying away from the wall. The wall itself's pretty dry. You can see the bush up there where we started before as we're walking up to it, and everything in here is pretty dry. So the water from the left to this point is probably crossing through the wall or flowing in the wall, and any that comes through is actually coming out to this ditching area that's about 2 feet from it. So that's pretty good up to the bush, right? But now I'm pointing out that we're getting a lot of flow rate. All the hill from the other side where we were is coming through the wall and actually then running through the ditch. If you look at the sloping, if you came out on site, you could see it. And now it comes to here, and there's a natural damming. That's what I just pointed to with the hand motion, is that we're at the bush. There's an uplift in the slope. The ditching continues, but there's an uplift, and so it turns and goes into the wall at that point by the bush. So here we are at that bush point. I'm looking back. I'm talking about the damming again, and I'm pointing to where, see, we have slurry points and water, standing water. And this is right where we saw those standing pools on the other side and that crossover point. See back across the other side? And this is kind of by the tree. So, and it's interesting, each of the 2 trees along the trail were natural dam points as I walked along it on the other side. And so the water would flow through it. So again, you're having all this water coming from the field to the right of me, and then it comes to the wall and is running along it. And see here, you can still see water flow, standing water. Some effusion, slurry points. It's really interesting. I'd never seen that much saturation in soil that you could just easily stick. It's almost like a glass of water sticking down to palm depth. But when you come back, that soil stays there, so it's just kind of a very loosely packed sandish type thing, which is bad because then the water flows right through that and hauls to where we don't want it to be. So we continue down. I'm looking at the flow. I'm seeing here, again, see those little holes at my left. So when the water's standing there and pushing down, it goes through there, actually kind of like a drain, and shoop, right across the wall. And oh, by the way, this is the second tree. Look across where it would flow to. It's right into the trailhead. And this is a kind of a uplift place. See how that's kind of dry? You don't see the drainage V that we saw before running along the other side of the wall. So I'm talking again, okay, coming from the field, goes in. I'm checking the sand, the soil, how saturated it is. Again, very saturated. Still no resistance to sticking your hand into palm depth anywhere along the wall. All this soil is just so saturated with water after this rain event. So keep walking. Now notice here it's kind of dry. We got a little bit of trickling, but I got a huge push point with a slurry right there, and it goes across, and guess where to? Right into our second trail point. So all that upwind stuff comes here, it's coming across, there's a natural damming effect that occurs, and so then it pushes down and through. Now here's your second damming by the tree. Again, by the trailhead. Sadly, both were bad. Now see, it's kind of dry there before the tree, but like 2 feet back, then we get into that slurry kind of feel. And and then after the tree, it's actually pretty good. It runs downhill with the wall. So let me go ahead and show you what this translates to in a picture. So basically, you can see here the yellow lines are the flow patterns of drainage that we were walking through in the video so far. Blocks of yellow are the natural damming points due to slope. Then overlaid on that are the red arrows, meaning places we think if we did French drain systems, it would control or at least put under mitigation the flow of what we primarily see. So on both sides of the edges of the wall, a notable drainage, French drain model, which means, you know, a ditch that might be a foot deep with a pipe underneath it, and then rock on top so that the water flows in and then drops into that pipe, and the pipe controls, and we have a consistent flow with that pipe through those dam points, the 3 dam points, especially on the upslope side to the farm, and then on the other side as well to catch anything that might be coming flow drainage wise into the wall from the picnic side of the wall. And then you can see the drainage going in the Y to catch anything that might have got across, and then an underground pipe to cross over at the intersection of the Y as the last step. So that's basically what we think now that we've looked at the drainage in detail is the best way to solve this erosion problem, and we're going to look to kind of get approval off that.